we're studying here in Tanya in chapter. One second. Everything we're studying now in chapter Chaf, Yutes, Chaf, Chaf Aleph, Chaf Beis. Actually, all those three chapters, Chaf, Chaf Aleph, Chaf Beis, are a summary, a relatively brief summary of what we're studying now in Chitas of Shari Chud Emunah. At the end of these chapters, which we'll get to B'ezrat Hashem soon. So he says that as we've explained somewhere else, and what he's referring to is Shari Chud Emunah, which is a much larger portion of Tanya. It's 12. The value of studying from there would be just the explanation. I find the explanation there to be again, it's much more gradual, much more organized, much more easier to comprehend, and also it's more inter-inclusive. I mean, he says things there that he doesn't say here. On the one hand, on the other hand, it's somewhat abstract or more abstract. And here, even though again the concepts are inherently abstract concepts, but here in Tanya, so the topic of Yichud Hashem, of the unity of Hashem, is only mentioned in relation, again in context of a certain aspect of the service of Hashem that he wants to surface. Whereas in Shari Chud Emunah, that's the topic. It's not. And also there's the introduction. The introduction of the Shah, the introduction of the 12 chapters. In that introduction, he does say why understanding and studying this topic is so fundamental to a Jew's ability to serve Hashem properly. But the topic is just depicted in and of itself. Whereas here, it's much more briefly depicted and much more in context. So I was just debating whether or not we should, we can take a poll on it if you want, whether or not we should keep reading it from here, which again just gives a general point without getting into the details at all, or if we want to like expand on this, then we like take a pause from chapter Chaf and go study the gradual explanation that we're actually doing in Chitas right now. Or at least the first few chapters of Shari Chud Emunah. I don't know if we go through the whole thing, but if we just study the first chapter, then I think we could. What's the poll on that? We'll make it a democracy. There are few enough women to take a democratic vote. Democracies don't work well when there are a lot of people. When there aren't, so you can do something. So what do you say? I don't.
I'd like to continue with Chaf, but I think to recommend that everybody does Chitas, because you'd have to really do more. You have to do chapter 7. You couldn't really just do a few chapters. I think
we'd have to do 1, 2, 3, 6, 7.
7.
6, 7. 1, 2, 3, and 6, 7. That's what we'd have to do, I think.
It's a wonderful topic, really. And
I just feel it's not really being explained. So let's read through. We'll keep going here. If that's
okay.
The verdict, anybody.
I'll do whatever Miriam says. I don't know enough to
vote. all democracies deteriorate monarchy eventually. That's it.
Okay, so there we go.
Okay, so
the democracy is over.
So we'll stick to it here.
Rabbi, I'll go with your intuition. Whatever you think.
Finish these 2 chapters, then we'll take another ballot.
Another vote. Okay.
Let me say that. So where were we? Chapter Chaf, nachon?
Yes, we're deeply
in the middle
into
or even in the end of chapter Chaf, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Yes, at the end.
Okay. Let's make a point that occurred to me in reference to these 2 places where this topic is explained. That other than the way he explains it being somewhat different, also the point he's looking to make is the opposite. I mean, here the point the Alter Rebbe wants to make at the end, what he's leading up to, is that at the end he wants to say that every detailed reality is godly. In a sense, he wants to stress the importance of reality, not the futility, not the bittul of reality. I mean, again, there's no contradiction between the two. But the vort he wants to say here, as we discussed in the beginning, is that he wants to explain why our sages explained or again assumed, like he mentioned in the beginning, there's a basic vort, a basic understanding in Judaism that the two first commandments of the Torah they include within themselves all of the Torah. All the do's are included in Anochi Hashem Elokecha, the mitzvah to believe in Hashem and the unity of Hashem, and all the don'ts are included under the commandments of Lo Yelech Elokim Achrim Al Panai, you shall have no other God. So the forbidding idolatry and commanding on the true faith in Hashem is the archetype or the seminal root of all of the mitzvot. Now, in order to explain that concept, why truly every mitzvah, every mitzvah taseh is a manifestation of faith, and every don't is a refrainment from idolatry. In order to explain that, he said we have to somewhat to tiptoe into the concept of the unity of Hashem, because that understanding of how the mitzvot are all manifestation of faith and idolatry is a result that you can derive that understanding only from understanding the unity of Hashem in reality. Reassessing reality, that concept. So that's why we stepped into this whole topic in the middle of Tanya. And in order to not just to explain hypothetically, theoretically, that a person will understand why Chazal said this, but moreover, like you mentioned, that in order for take one step back again, that because a Jew's intuitive service of Hashem, which is what the Alter Rebbe calls very near, if you recall the first two chapters, that's what he discussed in chapter 18 and 19, that the true meaning of the verse, that the Torah and mitzvot, karov elecha davar me'od, that the service of Hashem is very near, not just near, but very near. The true meaning of very near is that the service of Hashem is something intuitive, something spontaneous, natural to every Jew, not counterintuitive, not just counterintuitive. Whereas the service of the Beinoni that we discussed up until now was all a refinement and an effort, an artificial effort to counterintuitively serve Hashem. He says that can never be considered something that's very near. Very near refers to something that's natural to you, and the only mitzvah, the only element in my soul where I can see that the service of Hashem is natural. Natural is like inevitable. It's not something I need to do. It's not something I need to reconsider in order to force myself to do. It's something that happens to me inevitably, like I breathe or like I eat. In a sense, the way a Jew is usually identified with his animal soul. So that's how the service of Hashem should look. That it's something that I do naturally, very much like a tzaddik. So he says where every Jew is that way is only really in the Pintel Yid and is in the point where he's truly a tzaddik, which is where he associates whatever is occurring in life with the essence of his faith. The simple occurrence, the simple scenario where spontaneously reacts to serve Hashem without any need of consideration is only in Mesiras Nefesh. If my faith is threatened, if my connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is directly threatened, for instance, if I'm forced to idol worshipping or something of the sorts, so there you can see a natural service of Hashem where spontaneously, inevitably, every Jew reacts immediately with a lack of willingness to cooperate with such a thing. Now, the Torah says that all of Yiddishkeit should be that way. So in order to explain how all of Yiddishkeit can be that way, he said, this is why he wants to explain that when you conceive of all of the mitzvot as they are seminally, just a depiction of your faith or idolatry, then inevitably you'll relate to all the mitzvot as naturally and spontaneously as you relate to idolatry and faith. So this is where we're holding. Why we reach the topic of Yichud Hashem in the middle of Shar Yichud Ve'emunah. And the more you understand reality the way he's depicting it here, the more inevitably reality will be something that relates to your faith. And you'll find yourself spontaneously serving Hashem. That's the concept we're discussing. This is also why I had in mind that also the Alter Rebbe, why he himself devoted an entire portion of Tanya, other than what's written here, other than this summary. The reason an entire portion of Tanya, like half the book, in the original book, was just these two parts, the Likutei Amarim, the beginning. The reason Likutei Amarim, I mean, just like the Alter Rebbe in the beginning, only wrote Likutei Amarim, what we're studying now in Shar Yichud Ve'emunah. And moreover, as we discussed last time, if you look at the end of the day, the Chabad library, the main grand majority of around the deeper study, the Haskalah, of understanding and diving into the details and meditation on Hashem's unity, much more than the avoida of Likutei Amarim. There's much more literature in Chabad to understand the unity of Hashem. And the reason is what we discussed now, that the true service of Hashem, a spontaneous, natural service of Hashem, is a result of again, digesting or understanding this reassessment of reality. So that inevitably you relate spontaneously from your faith to reality. And so here in Likutei Amarim, it takes up relatively a very small proportion. But the Alter Rebbe devoted an entire section of the book just to explain this. Now, why did I mention all this? Just to make another point we haven't discussed yet that occurred to me lately studying Chitat. That in a sense, in Shar Yichud Ve'emunah, in the second portion of Tanya where he discusses this. He wants the course of things. Like the order of the explanation is such that he's looking to explain to you that even though you conceive of reality as being something existing in of itself and independently of Hashem, the true reality is such that all of reality is only annulled and interenclosed within HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in a sense, the atmosphere of the study is to see the nothingness of creation. How all of creation is nothing. It's all not to Hashem. Now here, the conclusion he wants you to, like the psychological conclusion he wants to awaken, in a sense, is the opposite. He wants you to feel that every minuscule detail of life is Mesiras Nefesh. You know, that what you do from a very essential place, you react that if, I don't know, if the Inquisition knocked on your door, or if there was a very, very radical circumstance which made it utterly apparent that this is referring to your faith. So the Alter Rebbe wants you to conceive reality in a way that every minuscule detail of Yiddishkeit will refer directly to your faith. So in a sense, what he wants to say is more that everything is godliness than that there's nothing but godliness. The two ways of looking at this, also in Chassidus, these two phrases I just mentioned are brought very many times. The unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu can be conceived of from two angles. It's like a run and return, Ratzov Ashov, of the unity of Hashem. The second, once a person meditates on the true nature of reality, then that dawning understanding can either awaken a sense of there being nothing in the world, only HaKadosh Baruch Hu exists. That all of reality loses its volume, loses its reality, loses its sense of seriousness. It all feels suddenly like up in smoke. Or the exact opposite, that everything that is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the phrases in Hebrew is God, in Yiddish actually, is God says Alt is God. That everything is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is everything. Which are actually two opposite senses. You're sensing that there's nothing but Hashem. that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is everything, which means that there's nothing but HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Everything is just, there's only HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world. That's a sense of reality losing its volume. It's like deflating the false, independent sense that reality has. But sensing that everything else is God, not that God is us, that everything there is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is in a sense the exact opposite sensation. It's not sending reality up in smoke. It's driving the seriousness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu into every detail. So it's taking things much more seriously. So again, what I'm saying now, this is not like a literated concept. It's not written anywhere, but the atmosphere of things is such that here, the conclusion he wants to reach, or the sensation he wants to awaken, is much more that Alts is God, that everything is Hashem, than that Hashem is everything. Whereas in Sha'ar Yichud V'Amunah, it's a much more theoretical study, and there the sensation, again, it's the same concept. There's no contradiction, but the atmosphere, that it's the way it's presented, the atmosphere coming of it is that that Hashem is everything. There's only a HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So why did I mention all this? Because I went back to what we started studying last week, and I read a little bit of how things are explained in different places. So you get the feeling. I mean, if you recall what we studied last week, deep concepts. He discussed, if you remember, five stages. He said 5 allegories, and we paralleled these 5 allegories. These are classic allegories. There's not only place where these allegories appear in Chassidut and Kabbalah. He mentioned 5 allegories of how to contemplate on the annulment of reality to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So you could get the feeling that what he wants to say is that reality is nothing, but really, as we'll see as we go along, is the existing of how it results that way, is that everything in reality is God. Why? Because therefore everything you do is expressing your faith. It's expressing the unity of Hashem, and any willingness to cling or to tolerate the slightest fluctuation from your faith is cultivating idolatry. It's your willingness to maintain idolatry to Hashem. And the more you sense that in every detail of creation, the more your Jewish intuition will ignite and become relevant in every detail in life. But again, initially, the meditation we started last week was seemingly the opposite. It was seemingly focusing on how reality is annulled to Hashem. So we have to get to what he's building up here. So we'll say what we started last week again. We said 5 stages. We'll say the allegory, and then I'll say the nimshal, what it's allegorizing. So the allegory, he said, was speech, thought. And he said one word, a word, or actual speech. And then he compared actual speech to the potential of speech, my ability to speak. And then he compared that to thought, which is the root of speech. And after that, he compared all of that thought to the midot shebanefesh, the attributes of the soul. And then he compared that to the soul itself. So that was 5 levels, 4 and a 5th. And we noted that this is he doesn't mention it here explicitly, but in other places, this is 4 worlds of Atzilut, Bria, Yetzirah, Asiyah, and what's above in the crown, Keter, or Atzimus, if you want. What's beyond the world of emanation. So now, what was the word? We won't go over everything. The word was that any stage is an infinite gap. That if I try to compare a singular statement, like a singular recorded class, to the potential of speech, and every speech is an expression of something. If I try to take any word, any specific, the lowest allegory here, just one statement, is finitude. It's actual finitude. Even though, again, also within one class, I could say that there's folded up a finite infinity, like there's infinite depth in that one statement. But the borderlines are very clear. Like you could you could delve deeply into that finite pool, but it's still relatively finitude. And if I compare that to my potential of speech, how much I could say on the topic, so that's an infinity to finitude. Now, thought itself, if I take that second stage of my potential of speech, like my ability to phrase things outwards, relatively to my conception, to my thought of that concept inwards, how it's phrased to myself. Again, that's a leap from finitude to infinity. Now, that's the second leap. The third leap, which is much, much greater, is if I compare my expression of self inwards, my thought, to my experience. That thought and experience complete. It says that the difference between all of the previous three allegories, again, a singular statement, my ability to express myself, and my thought, my ability to express myself inwards, and my ability to express myself outwards, and a statement. These three allegories, they're all letters, otiyot. They all have specifically phrased concepts. So letters here doesn't necessarily mean literally letters, even though again that's the allegory. But letters means again finitude. It's phrased. It's depicted. It's a specific expression of self. There's a specification within the expression, whereas my sense of self, my experience, it's higher than letters. It's not graspable within a specific phrase. So, like, this is a very simple psychological allegory. The example we said last week, that if I love my son, I love my children. So I can think about it a lot, and I can talk about it a lot, and I can say something at the end. I can think about it, and I have a lot to say about it, and I can say something. I can say to my son, I love you. And then there's everything I have to say about my love. And there's my thoughts. There's the three levels. All of these three levels are infinitely less than my experience of love. My experience is infinitely more seminal and infinitely larger, and that also it lacks specification. And my experience is not lettered out. It's not a phrase, not an expression of self. It's a being of self. So there's an essential difference between my experience and the lower three levels. This is very important for the next stage he wants to develop in the text. And he said 5 allegories, and you have to note that there's an essential gap between the third and the fourth. What is this gap? This is the gap, the leap between the world of emanation, of Atzilut, and the lower three worlds of Bria Yetzirah Asiyah, of creation, formation, and action. So if you're familiar with these terms from other places in Kabbalah, these are very basic terms, that there are the 4 worlds, but there's an essential difference between the world of Atzilut, the higher world of emanation, and the 3 lower worlds. And the classic allegory for this in the soul is the difference between myself and my garments. Within my garments, there's also a very large gap between my thought, my speech, and my action. But the essential gap is between all 3 garments and myself. And that's the gap we just described. That all of my expressions of self are phrased. There's finitude there. Why the worlds of creation, formation, and action, Bria Yetzirah Asiyah, are all finite worlds to a certain extent. Even though, again, relatively between them, there's also enormous leaps. But still, in general, they're all finite creations. because they're all just expressions of self. They're not part of self. Same thing in my soul. That everything I think about, like right now I'm teaching a class. So let's assume that this concept is something I have a lot of thoughts of. Okay, I understand it, and my thought expresses my understanding to myself. And there in my thought, my understanding is very, very clearly, relatively very, very clear. What I have to say about it is much, much less. And what I actually manage to say in 40 minutes is much, much less. So there's, again, three garments. The mutual, the common denominator of all the garments is that all three of them are only an expression of self. They're not part of myself. And between the three, you can see an enormous gap between each one. So my thought, which is my expression of myself to myself, is almost an authentic expression of self. That's what thought is. It's called Or HaMe'ir Le'atzmo, light shining to self, inwards. It's how I shine to myself, how I express myself to myself. That's what my thought is. Speech, which again in our allegory here, speech is not actual speech, it's what I have to say about it. So that's the light I shine to others, how I express it outwards. And the practical, actual statement, which relatively in Kabbalah isn't called speech, it's called action, because it's a physical, like the physical speech in Kabbalah is action. It's like doing something, because you're making physical noise. You're cutting material. So again, we're not very accustomed to thinking about it that way. But the human speech, like when like bodily speech, what I'm doing right now, so relatively in Kabbalah, that's called action. Where speech is more, again, what I have to say. And thought is my thoughts. So that's why speech is this material world, because like my speech is a material thing. It even says in Halacha, that every mitzvah has a practical element to it. You need to do something. So if you're putting on tefillin, then you need material black boxes, and they have to be physical boxes. You can't just do it spiritually. Now, it says explicit act being used, the artifact is your speech. That's why when you pray, for instance, or you say a bracha, so you have to say it, you have to word out the words, you have to make it, you have to hear it in your ear. There has to be physical sounds being created. That's the artifact of the mitzvah. And if you don't word out your prayer, then it's as if you did all the kavanot and all of the spiritual elements of tefillin, but you didn't take the box and put it on your hand. So the maaseh, like the physical part, wasn't created. So again, you see this in halacha, that the physical speech is referred to as considered an artifact. It's considered action. It's not considered speech. Whereas speech is what I have to say about something. And thought is how I reveal myself to myself. These are the three lower worlds which correspond to the garments of the soul: thought, speech, and action. Now, the higher world is the world of emanation, Atzilut. So what is that in my soul? So this simple Atzilut is my experience of self. It's not my expression of self. It's not even my expression of self to myself, which is the world of creation. It's just my being. So my experience of self. So in reference of this class, for instance, what I think of the topic is the world of creation. What I have to say on the topic is the world of formation. And what I'm actually saying, that's the world of action. So my understanding, again, not my thoughts, and not how I phrase to myself my understanding. The actual understanding, the experience of a concept, that's the world of emanation. That's Atzilut. Now, if I use an allegory of a class, so it's more the Chabad of Atzilut. But if I use the allegory, for instance, I said before about loving someone. So again, constant thoughts about how I love you. That's the world of creation. And what I have to say about my love, like all my poetry, that's formation. And what I actually say, the statement I make, that's action. That's the lowest world, our world. And the experience of love, that's chesed de atzilut. That's already the world of emanation, the higher world of emanation. So again, so there are we said three gaps, but you need to note that the first three gaps are all relatively garments. The third gap, he says, between thought and being is leaping into the world of emanation, saying that it's a much more infinite gap. So how any thought is included in my experience is infinite. My experience is infinitely larger than any expression of self. And within my expression of self, thought is infinitely more than speech, and speech is infinitely more than a specific word, which is action. Now, what was the last leap he said? The last leap he said was one level higher, that the experience of self and self are also two things. That in the end, even though up until like just now we took the time to explain how much my experience of self, my love, is completely united with me. It's so infinite compared to my thought, speech, or action. But again, I'm not love. I mean, my love is only me, but that's not what I am. So even my experience of self, to the essence of who I am, of self, the I loving is again an infinite gap. These were the 5 stages he mentioned, if you recall. And this is again the lower 4 worlds. Okay, that's what we studied up until now. Now, what did he want to seemingly? What was the point he was making? Just to notice, he said that he started by noting that the whole world was created by speech. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, "Let there be light. Let there be grass. Let there be water." And all of reality is nothing but HaKadosh Baruch Hu's speech. And again, which speech is this? This is an actual statement. Like every creation, like the word in Hebrew for a thing is davar. That's the Hebrew word for anything, like any artifact, is called a davar. The same word for a speech, dibur, like a word. The word for thing in Hebrew is word. That's what you call a thing. A thing is called a word. Why? Because everything is like a detailed statement of a HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Who said, "Let there be light." So light is a saying. That's why the word for anything in Hebrew is davar. Davar means dibur. It means a statement, a singular statement. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu said reality, and every singular artifact in reality, every detailed reality is a specific statement of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So he wants to take this 5-stage meditation and he wants you to reflect on all the things in reality, how annulled they are to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So just like we just took a single statement and we saw how infinitely finite that is, how infinitely irrelevant it would be compared to your ability of speech, and how infinitely irrelevant that would be compared to your thought, and how infinitely irrelevant that would be compared to your experience of self, and how infinitely irrelevant that would be to your with reality. Like one word, it's like a statement, a singular statement, 10 statements, like a class. It's a specific class, it's a recorded class, it's a finite class. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said 10 things. And those statements are the world of action. Like we said, that a specific word is actually the action. It's the artifact side of speech. And how infinitely small, let's use the word small, is all of our creation relatively to what Hashem has to say. That's the world of formation. What Hashem has to say about creation. And our world is what Hashem actually said. And the world of formation is what he has to say. And the world of creation is what he thinks. And the world of emanation is what he feels and understands. And higher than that is just what he is, who he is. So our existence is very, very, not just small, it's not proportionally small, it's infinitely small. It's reality, but we'll see very soon that he flips into this contemplation and say the exact opposite thing. That every little detail is essential. So, but up until now, he's just noticed how nothing it is, how nothing a word is to us, to the ability to speech, to thought, all the way to Kadosh Baruch Hu. Same thing. Reality is so annulled to Hashem. It's so fragile, so nothingness to Hashem. That's what we said up until now. So where were we in the words here? That was all chapter summarized. So we'll start today, chapter 21. Now here again, he's starting to pivot the meditation. Now this is exactly what we just studied in Shari Chut Emunah. It says like this: V'hine midat HaKadosh Baruch Hu shelo kemidat basar. Up until now, he allegorized the unity of Hashem by allegorizing HaKadosh Baruch Hu to a person. Just like your speech is relatively to your ability to speak, and now he's saying, but Hashem isn't a person. Hashem is not like us. What does that mean? שהאדם כשמדבר דיבור, הרי הבל הדיבור שבפיו הוא מורגש ונראה דבר בפני עצמו מובדל משורשו. עשר בחינות הנפש עצמה. I'm making a point. That when I said this allegory about the lack of value between speech and everything about a person, you need to note that a person like every stage we discussed about a person, we took something and one of these things in the allegory, in a human being, each one of these things is something else. A word that you said, like the words he says here is the hevel, like the air or the sound or whatever the physical artifact element of the word consists of. Linguistic abilities are something, and your thoughts are something. In every category, in a person, there's a different artifact being discussed. The Kodesh Baruch Hu, there's no the artifacts. In the allegory, what is he saying here? I want you to notice, the Alter Rebbe says, that the allegory I wanted to make was only the allegory of values. You have a little bit of a concept of the lack of value between your speech, one statement, and your ability to speak. All of your ability to speak and your thought. So that's a word I never, maybe someone can help me. I never, a simple word for mashal and what it's looking for. No. Very hard. It always, when you study Chassidus, this is something very frustrating. I never got a good word in English. How do you say?
Analog and analogy.
Analogy?
Is
Analogy
the mashal? Is the mashal?
Right.
Right. The mashal and the nimshal, the analog. Analog.
The analog is the nimshal?
Yeah.
Okay. So an analogy that I know, an analog is the nimshal. So he wants you to notice that there's in the analogy of speech. Analogizing, I don't know what the word is. What element of the analogy is relevant? What part of this analogy is the Alter Rebbe referring to, and what part isn't similar? So the analogy was looking to depict the lack of value between stages. Similarly to a person, that like there's an immense, infinite gap between one word and your ability to speak. But in reality, my speech and Hashem's speech is very different. The Baruch Hu doesn't really speak. It's just it's just an analogy. But in the analog, it's not the same thing. Now, what's the difference? Very simple. That my speech, the gap between my one word and my ability to speak is not only a gap of value, it's also a gap of this. There's sound, there's the air coming out of my lungs. I mean, there's all kinds of material that is irrelevant in my ability to speak. With the Kodesh Baruch Hu, it's not like that doesn't analyze, the analog isn't similar to the analogy in that element. Why? Because again, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's not that he speaks about something that already exists. He's not talking about something. And when I talk, I'm talking about something. There's something, and I'm talking about it. When we say HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates the world with speech, what I mean, not that there's something Hashem's talking about, that he's forming. When I speak, I take an already existing creation. I take air, I take sounds, and I form them. And in a sense, that's the nearest allegory we have for me creating something. I'm creating a word, but I'm not really creating the matter. I'm just creating the form, I'm recreating the form, shaping the matter. But when HaKadosh Baruch Hu is that what is that this table is Hashem's statement table. When Hashem says the word table, not much more how exactly the word table comes from the seminal 10 statements HaKadosh Baruch Hu said in creating the world, that's irrelevant to us right now. But the bottom line is that when Hashem said table, the word table, like I said in Hebrew, the word for a thing is a word, because what the thing is that davar, it's that shaped the table out of a priorly existing matter, obviously, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu said table, and that's what the table is. The table is what Hashem is saying table. So the allegory from a person's speech, it analyzes, it reflects, or it correctly or relatively correctly depict value between each. Does not depict the analogs, not every detail. So the main point is that when I speak, and I'm forming matter, there's something happening here other than myself, other than my speech. In order for me to speak, I need air, I need sound to talk about. So my speech is happening in an already existing creation. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's speech is creation. Important to notice that a person is speaking. So the hevel, the air, all of the sound, the form of his speech is experienced and apparent as something other than himself. He's not speaking himself. He's not creating the sound, creation. And therefore, the word itself exists as something other than myself. Because I formed an already existing form. And at the end, the sound isn't me. It's not really part of who I am. And I created it, and it's even, in a way, it's dependent on me. The second I stop speaking, it's not there anymore. But the bottom line is that the word I say, or the words I'm saying right now, they're something other than myself. Why? Because again, their matter existed before speech, because his speech is the reality. And what he says table, that's the table. Therefore, the table isn't something other than himself. This logic, what I just said, that very brief statement, is the most basic logic of all of the unity of Hashem in Torah. It's a very important concept. It's very simple in a sense, but I see it a lot of people find this hard to conceive. I don't really know why, and so much so that in many of the interpretations of Tanya, it's misinterpreted. Again, when interpretations of Tanya, it's misinterpreted. And when a Kodesh Baruch, maybe I'll phrase this even more, something, and as a result of that statement, something was created. That's not what it says. Not that Hashem said, "Let there be light," and then as a result of His statement, there became light. There's no light other than the statement. The statement is the light. If Kodesh Baruch Hu says table, the table are these letters, Shin, Lamed, Chet. How that works in explaining how all of the reality around us is just, the last 6 chapters of 12 chapters is all just explaining that concept, because that's the hardest part to, like the most counterintuitive part of the unity of Hashem is at the end understanding what does it mean that what I'm looking at is just speech and letters. That's not like a natural conception. Like the Alter Rebbe says in the beginning of Shayachut B'emunah, you have to think about it a lot and return it to your heart time and time again until it settles, because it's not something, so it's not easily settled. It's what we always call counterintuitive. So this part is saying at the end that what creates the statements of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's something that it's hard to understand. But the other side of this, understanding that being the case, again, being able to look at reality and understand that this is letters, like it's like the prophet. It says that the prophet, he sees the Hashem is speaking to him. He looks at reality, and his prophet needs a lot of explaining. That's what prophecy means. So in a sense, we're all prophets. We're just not very good at our prophecies, and we look at all these letters and we just don't understand anything. We're all little illiterate prophets. We need to learn how to read. So every person, every Jew is it says, like in the time of our prophets. So there was a school. There was schools of prophecy. Eliyahu had Bnei Nevi'im. He had a school for prophecy. So our experience of creation is like an illiterate prophet. But that's what it says here. That at the end, all of what creation is just Hashem wording out creation. This is a very important thing to understand, this detail, that not to misunderstand. It doesn't mean that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, "Let there be a table," and the table came out of that. That's not what he's saying. The word table is the table. There's nothing but, that's the point he's making here, that when I speak, I'm taking air or sound or something, and I'm also talking about an existing table, an existing concept, and my speech itself is forming an already existing space or air or sound. When Hashem speaks, His speech is the air and the sound. And that's what it means that Hashem created a world. His speech, He said, "Let there be," and that speech is the world. There's nothing but His speech in reality. This is the difference between my speech and Hashem's speech. That's what he's saying here. Therefore, when I speak, the word, or the artifact of the word, which I didn't create it, was there. The air and the sound existed before I spoke, and therefore the word I form is something other than me, because its matter was always something other than me, and it remains something other than me. But because of Kodesh Baruch Hu, His speech isn't the form. His speech is the artifact. That's what there is. Therefore, it's nothing other than Himself. This is the everything. It needs a lot of meditation. So we only read 3 lines here. I see it's late, so we'll finish here. We read 3 lines. We'll continue for you next time, but you can think about this for a week. Now, if in a week, this makes just simple sense. Again, I'll say it again, that once you say that the speech is the artifact, then you have to say that there's nothing but the speaker. Because our speech is I'm forming an already existing artifact, that's why my words are something separate than me. Because the form, the artifact was never me. But because Kadosh Baruch Hu's speech is the artifact, therefore it's one with him. And this logic is very important for the whole study. That's what he just said here. We'll start from here again next time. Okay, so also if you're doing chitas, so it's very important for how you're studying chitas right now. So these are similar concepts.
Thank you.
With that, I'll update about the recordings, I hope, very soon.